Line. Lars Larson joins us now. He is a nationally syndicated radio show host. He engaged a marketing firm and spent millions of dollars to come up with the name of his radio program. It is The Lars Larson Show. You can hear it right here on SuperTalk, Mississippi. Lars, always appreciate your time and enjoy the visits. I would like to start here this morning, if we could. We just finished up a conversation with the state superintendent of education in Mississippi. Mississippi, like a lot of states, has had funding that is frozen that was coming from the federal Department of Education, about $137 million, and it's left some districts in limbo. So this is more a conversation about DOGE. We know that there is waste. We know that there is inefficiency, but we also know that there's money that has been promised to states for projects that are ongoing. In a lot of ways, there's a ready, fire, aim approach that is happening with DOGE. Is it okay to approach it that way and then clean up the messes as they happen? Or should there be a more organized, systematic approach to the way we are trying to eliminate fraud and waste and abuse?
Richard, it's great to be with you, but I'll tell you, I understand it would be nice to take that steady, careful approach and say, let's line out all the cuts, we'll figure out what they are, and then we'll implement them slowly over time. You know what? That doesn't work. It doesn't work with government, and I can tell you why. Because usually when you take that longer approach, it never gets done. What they've done is something, and I'll compare it to this way. Before they kicked me out of television, because I have a face for radio, we had the engineers decided at one point that we had too many computer ports open. Now, don't ask me what ports are, but it was the way that we, would hook in from the field. And you know what their solution was? They turned all of them off. And then they waited for the phone calls. And when people said, hey, I need that port, they would turn that one back on. Now, that's a blunt force approach, but it does work. And let me tell you why it's especially applicable, I think, to education. I'm glad you brought up education. There are a lot of people, sad to say, who don't know how schools get paid for. And that's a sad thing, because we spend more on schools than every other civilized country on the planet. There is no other country that spends more per student per year than the United States. So how much of that money comes from Washington, D.C.? In the biggest districts, it's usually a maximum of 10%. And in the smaller districts, they get less because the big districts are politically important, so they get more, and the smaller districts get less, which is not the right way to allocate money anyway. But having said that, you ask me, how many families in Mississippi, how many businesses in Mississippi have over, say, the last 20 years had to take a 10% reduction? And they survived it. They said, well, we're going to tighten up our belt. We may lose a person or two at a business, but we're going to tighten up our belt. These school districts are saying the sky is falling. We won't be able to educate your kids. You're telling me that you can't absorb a 10% cut. And the other problem is that most of that money was allocated from the federal government with giant puppet strings attached to it, which means that, they said to the district, you can have this money, but you have to push DEI or CRT or a bunch of other really damaging, dangerous philosophies or ideologies. And so when they cut that federal education money and a district loses 10%, it was usually allocated to something specific. The only place I'd make an exception to that is there is some money for special needs kids who have disabilities of one kind or another. God bless them, but you've got to take care of those kids. But I think most of the districts, if you said to them, could you survive a 10% reduction in funding? And let's be real, Richard, this is borrowed money. Remember, our federal government is spending $6 trillion and only takes in $4 trillion. That's a $2 trillion deficit. We are rapidly seeing the point where America may not be able to come back from the debt load we've got. Just to make it real for people, let's see, the math is every single day when you wake up, the first $3 billion that the government spends is spent to pay the interest on the debt, not the debt itself, just the interest. $3 billion a day, $1 trillion a year is spent on that. And that number is going to go up. And as interest rates stay high, it gets worse. So I know that's a long answer, but number one, you don't want those strings from Washington, D.C. They will ask Mississippi, they will demand that Mississippi do things that Mississippians would not have signed off on, ugly things to your kids. Number two, the district can survive that kind of reduction. And frankly, I think schools are better when they are run locally and funded locally. And the minute Uncle Sam says, I've got some money for you, expect it to come with some demands attached to it. And Americans don't need that.
I agree with almost everything that you're saying, and I've talked with local district people where I live, and they've said, yeah, I mean, in terms of federal money, it's somewhere between 3% and 6% that we get, and so I think they can survive on that. One of the issues, though, specifically was okay. There are these funds that are in place, and they're still related to COVID-19, which feels like, why are we still doing that as part of the conversation? But if a school district applied for a specific program and it pertained to a construction project and they're in the middle of that, should the federal government be obligated to pay what they said they would pay to finish a project?
I would say that you finish the project with local funds. I mean, if the money is being cut off, the obvious solution is you're in the middle of it, you're obligated, you've signed a contract, you owe the money one way or the other. And if the federal government is paying for a portion of it, can the district pick up that portion? And will that hurt the kids to bring the money over there? I got to tell you something. Governments are constantly saying, we don't have the money. And you say, but you're sitting on a pile of, but that's already allocated to other things. And then the minute they actually want to do something, they'll say, wow, we found a magic way, for example, to shift Medicaid money. And if you ask most people, what does Medicaid money get spent on? Well, it's spent on health insurance for the poor. Oh, how did it get shifted over to provide housing for illegal aliens over the last 4 years? You say, well, that was some of that budget magic they do, where when they don't want to do something, they'll tell you, we're not allowed to do it. It may look like we're sitting on a pile of cash, but every single dollar of it is already spoken for. And then the minute they do want to do something, they say, we can magically move this money over here and that money over there. And so it's amazing how the magic only works when the folks in charge want to do something. Remember that during both COVID and during the invasion of illegal aliens for the last 4 years, the federal and state governments found wonderful ways to shift money 6 ways from Sunday. And so it puts the lie to the idea that they say, well, I'm sorry, we can't spend that money on that very urgently needed need because it was already dedicated by, say, the Mississippi legislature or by the folks on Capitol Hill. I would call the lie on that one.
Does the same line of thinking apply to the tariff conversation? We know that is chaotic, right? I mean, it's okay, tariffs on everybody. No, we're going to back off on these certain sectors. Well, these countries get a 90-day break. Well, China's 125% and all of those things. Is the whole ready, fire, aim, is it the same as you were saying a second ago? If you try and do it in a systematic way where you roll it over time, it never gets done. So you just put it in place and then fix it as you need to, case by case?
I think some of that is true. And some of the chaos is, I think, by design. I think Donald Trump knows what he's doing when he's cutting deals and negotiating. And frankly, how many times have you ever, I'll take a simple example in terms of negotiating things that you and I have done, Richard. You walk onto a car lot and you say, yeah, I'm just looking around. The guy comes out and says, let me show you, what are you looking for? And you tell him, I'm looking for a pickup truck. He said, I got this one right here. It's only $55,000. I say, a lot more than I was planning on spending. So yeah, I'll see you later. And you start to walk off. And he says, oh, no, hold on. Come on back. Let me tell you about this truck. And I think we can work on that number. You have to be ready to walk away at any time. Now, that's one kind of negotiating. What do you do when China and other countries have been ripping off? And I think Trump is accurate when he says ripping off the United States. And let me tell you where I think the proof of that is. If we had a truly equitable, I almost hate using that word because the liberals have been misusing it lately, but if you had an equitable deal, say there are two stores in Mississippi that buy products and services from each other. And one says, we're going to sell to you at wholesale. And the other one says, that's great. I'm going to sell to you at retail. And the guy who's selling at wholesale says, why am I giving you a wholesale deal when you're getting, full retail? And that's not equitable. So if the United States says to China, why are our products tariffed so heavily going into your country and your products are not tariffed heavily coming into ours? Let's get that equaled up. And I think Trump eventually wants to get to zero tariffs. And maybe we never will. There may be some special circumstances where zero tariffs doesn't work. But how do you get there? And you say, well, you sit down and negotiate. I got to tell you something, Richard. Every single worker, and I would especially point out union workers. I'm not a big fan of unions, but I don't want to be in a union. But if somebody wants to be in a union, that's fine. How do they negotiate with the boss? They say to the boss, we all need raises. And the boss says, yeah, I don't have a lot of money, so I can't give you raises. And the union says, well, we're going to have to get raises. You could sit there and talk forever. But at the point where the union or the individual worker says, boss, if I don't get a raise, I'm going to have to go down the road
walk away
and work for somebody else.
Hold that thought, Lars. We're going to pick this up in just a couple of minutes. Mornings with Richard Cross.
Thanks, Rich.
The call and the coffee. Mornings with Richard Cross, SuperTalk Mississippi, streaming at supertalk.fm, SuperTalk TV, of course, on your SuperTalk Mississippi radio stations covering the entire Magnolia State. Always enjoy our visits with Lars Larson, host of the Lars Larson Show. You can hear that starting at 6 p.m. weeknights here on SuperTalk Mississippi. You were making a point about union workers in negotiation, but that's a point that really goes across all negotiations. There is nothing more liberating if you are engaged in a real estate transaction when you get to the point that you are willing to say no and you are willing to walk away. I mean, yeah. It's the greatest negotiating tool that exists. You're like, no. Well, but no. The answer is no. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, yeah, maybe we can get a deal done.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Everybody has done it at some level. Even the youngest worker out there who's been working for 6 months for somebody who promised him a raise or her a raise. And at some point he says, hey, boss, if I don't get a raise, I got to go. If you're not willing to walk out the door, then you have already lost the negotiation. So let me suggest, how do I know that the United States has been getting screwed in these deals? And they say, well, Lars, you're a Trump guy, so you just agree with anything the president says. And I said, no, think about this. Have any of these countries come out and said to the world, hey, look at this. This is the deal we've currently got with the U.S., and the U.S. is being unreasonable. We already have equitable trade. None of them, not one of them is saying that. Do you think the Democrats and the media would be happy to say, well, here's the very equitable trade arrangement we have with China. They're being fair to us. We're being fair to them. It's equitable. Nobody's saying that because everybody knows it's not equitable. Now, I will tell you, Richard, if you've ever got one of those deals where it's all coming your way and you're getting 70 and the other guy is getting 30, who would blame you for saying, yeah, we'd like to continue with the current system. We like 70-30. And then when somebody says, can we sit down and talk about 50-50? And you say, we can talk about it all you want, but as long as we're getting 70-30, we're not going to be really willing to change. And then like the worker or the union that says the boss, if it don't change, we're going out the door. And as you said, if you've got the guts to walk out the door for real, then you can actually negotiate. Otherwise, you're not going to find it much of a negotiation. The boss will nod sagely and say, I've heard all your concerns. You can't pay your bills and your work, your skills and talents are worth more, but I'm not going to pay you more. And when you don't walk out the door, guess who wins? The boss.
I was intrigued this morning when I saw the Q1 numbers for Tesla. 128,000, give or take, Teslas sold in the United States in Q1. That is 10 times more. That is more than the next 10 electric vehicle manufacturers combined. For all the people that were selling their Teslas and getting rid of them and making a statement, there seem to be a lot of people that are still buying them. I'm not an electric vehicle guy. I got friends who
Neither
are.
am I. My pickup truck runs on gasoline, and I'm glad for my V8.
Amen and amen. But to me, Tesla is an interesting test case for this manufacturing in America conversation. We're talking about bringing companies back to the United States. And I say, well, you can't do it. It's too expensive. And yet the sticker price on a Tesla is pretty comparable to the sticker price on a GMC or a Chevrolet or a Ford.
Well, in comparable cars, because the difference has been, in the last couple of years, has been maybe 10 grand difference. And that's a big difference. Somebody walks onto a lot and says, I'd like to look at one of those new electric cars, whether it's a Tesla or some other kind of car. And the dealer says, yeah, here's this car. And the comparables, and if you said, show me the comparable size gasoline car, it's going to be cheaper. And not only that, but, the fueling mechanism is still problematic. I mean, to use complicated words for it, because think about this. I drove down to the Hoover Institution last week for our broadcast, which we do every year from the Hoover Institution. It's about 800 miles. And I never had to sit there and plan out my trip saying, I know I have to go this far, and then my vehicle's going to be out of electricity, and I'll need to stop for at least an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours, and then I can travel on another couple of hundred miles and stop again and map out that there are actually chargers. I just got in the pick, I drove my SUV, and I took my producer with me, and God bless him. And we just thought, okay, if when the tank starts to get down to about a quarter, you look for the next exit. Unless you're in, there are some rural areas in my region where it says 70 miles to next services, and you have to pay attention to that. But other than that, you can pretty much get off wherever you want and refuel. AAA says the average refueling time for a gasoline or diesel car is 7 minutes. Now, do you know of an electric car that will recharge even in 1 hour? There are some fast chargers, if you can find them, if your car works with them, and they're more expensive, that will charge your car an hour, hour and a half. Now imagine this, if I pull up at the pumps and there are two cars ahead of me, I know the most they're probably going to take is 7 minutes each. So I might have to wait 15 minutes to pull up the pumps, and I'll be done in another 5 or 6 minutes after that. With an electric car, you start doing the math, you say, honey, you better go get lunch because I'm going to be sitting here for hours.
Yeah, there certainly is an efficiency thing, and what is your time worth? And that, I guess it depends if you're a long traveler or you're a short commuter. Maybe that does make sense.
Richard, Larson, when I did the drive back I did the drive down in 2 days, almost 800 miles. Did the drive back. I asked my producer. I said, "Are you okay to do the whole 8 or 785?" in 1 day? He said, sure. We left at 7 a.m. I walked in my front door after dropping off my producer at 7 o'clock at night, 12 hours. You'd have never done that with an electric vehicle. So they are practical and they make sense for some people, and they are completely impractical for everybody else.
How much importance do you place on the announcement from NVIDIA yesterday, the $500
about manufacturing in America? I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I guess Richard, that's what I'm getting at. Whether or not we're talking about manufacturing Teslas or we're talking about supercomputing chips or supercomputers or AI technology going forward, this idea that it can't be done in the United States because it's too expensive, we're seeing examples where it is done and they're figuring out a way to make it work.
Well, let me put it this way. America created the integrated circuit. We pioneered that technology. Now, there are a lot of other companies like Taiwan Semiconductor that make them too. Intel, which is their biggest location, is about 15 miles that way from me, and they employ about 5,000 people. They're a huge employer, and they make 75% of the integrated circuit chips that are made in the United States. And yet the country that pioneered the technology of integrated circuits only makes 10% of the world's ICs. Now, why is that? Shouldn't we be making a lot of them? Now, they are technologically complicated, but they do employ people at very high rates of pay in these fabs. We ought to have fabs all over the place. So when I saw the NVIDIA announcement, I thought, this is great. They're going to make these things here. And why not? Do you want to make chips in a third world country?
Yeah, let's maybe try and get away from that. Just a couple of minutes left with Lars Larson. We talked about this yesterday. I'm sure you've talked about it as well. The Pentagon taking over, Roosevelt Ranch, the federal lands that border 3 states along the southern border. Is there any reason to be concerned about this, or is this a good use of federal lands?
I think that's a decent use of federal lands. I've got my own complaints about the fact that we have almost 200 million acres of forests and we don't cut much in the way of trees. We don't cut nearly what we should. But yeah, I think the announcement from the Pentagon's a good idea. And I'm going to go with it for now unless I hear otherwise.
Yeah. Certainly a lot going on. Is there a topic that for you right now is the flashing neon light at the top? It's like, this matters more than anything else we're talking about right now.
No, I think all of the things that are being done by President Trump, and he's moving at lightning speed, and I applaud him for that, because usually government works at the speed of a glacier, and that's sad. There is one, I'll tell you what, I'll throw one important one out there, but it's more not so much on President Trump, but on Capitol Hill. The Trump tax cuts are so significant to every single person listening to your show. And why? Because the minute they go away, the child care tax credit drops in half, and the standard deduction, I'm not a tax guy, I have somebody else do my taxes, and I have since I was 18 years old, but the standard deduction for a couple was $12,000. When the Trump tax cuts came in, that doubled to $25,000. That means you don't pay taxes on the first $25,000 you make. The minute they evaporate at the end of this year, it goes right back to 12, and everybody listening to this show is going to be paying an average of 20% on another $12,000. Do the math. You're out about $2,500 right there, even if the child care tax credit doesn't touch you. And why the Republicans have not automatically said, let's just get this thing made permanent in 2017. They're playing chicken with the end of the year deadline, and that's a dumb thing to do.
Lars Larson, you can hear him from 6 until 9 right here on SuperTalk Mississippi, weekday nights. Always appreciate the time. Good visiting with you, my friend.
It is my pleasure, Richard. Thank you.
Mornings with Richard Cross, SuperTalk Mississippi. Half an hour left with you on this beautiful Tuesday in the Magnolia State. Quick time out. We're back with you right after this.